It's hardly an overstatement that Lorentz transformations are elevated to the status of the cornerstone of contemporary physics. Remove Lorentz transformations, and there will be no general relativity, string theories, cosmology, particle physics theories, black holes, Big Bang theory, to say nothing of infiltrating some aspects of electrodynamics and even chemistry. Therefore, the unequivocal fact must be of primary concern that Lorentz transformations have no physical meaning whatsoever, as found for the first time by this author. These transformations are formally correct, mathematically impeccable, but have no place in physics. All the mentioned widely promoted resultants from the Lorentz transformations, with the created aura of some exceptional science, are just fantasies with no basis in reality, enjoyable by some scientists who just want to be cool. Lorentz transformations are not only non-physical because they contradict the principle of relativity, as found for the first time by this author, a fatal contradiction causing Einstein's relativity to derive in effect that 1 equals 2, which is an obvious nonsense. Nonsense which makes it out of the question that there can be an experimental test or an experiment proving the validity of Einstein's relativity, and which mandates that Einstein's relativity be removed from physics in its entirety. But Lorentz transformations are non-physical in their own right, destroying the very notion of length, which also makes it out of the question to consider claimed length contraction as a real phenomenon. Indeed, the Lorentz transformations calculate for the spatial coordinate the following. C is equal to beta times x minus vt. And for the temporal coordinate tau, these same Lorentz transformations calculate beta times t minus vx over c squared. Now let's take for simplicity the value of the velocity of light c to be unity. The value of the uniform translatory motion with the uniform rectilinear motion, v, to be equal to 0.6 of c. Then the value of the coefficient beta, which is 1 over square root of 1 minus v squared over c squared, to be 1.25. Now, having these values, it's easy to calculate by using Lorentz transformations that the beginning of Einstein's favorite rigid rod, placed at x sub 1 equal to 0. So imagine this is the beginning of this rigid rod. And this beginning is placed at x sub 1 equals 0. So these Lorentz transformations transform this x sub 1 into c sub 1 equal to 0. While the spatial coordinate at the end of this rigid rod, x sub 2, which is, say, equal to unity, the Lorentz transformations calculate as c sub 2 equals 1.25. Now those who like to use the Lorentz transformations will exclaim, aha, the length of a rigid rod changes when undergoing Lorentz transformations. Originally it is unit t, and after the transformations, that length becomes 1.25. These Lorentz transformations enthusiasts will say. However, the Lorentz transformation enthusiasts overlook the fact that time is also transformed. Thus, while originally the time t sub 1 and t sub 2 is the same, 0. In other words, the two ends of the rigid rod, A and B, before applying the transformations, exist at the same time. After the transformations, while time tau sub 1 is 0, tau sub 2, due to the Lorentz transformations, becomes equal to minus 0.75. Thus, while originally both ends of the rigid rod exist simultaneously at time, say, t0, the transformed tau sub 1 and tau sub 2 are now two different times. The two ends of the rod exist at two different times after the Lorentz transformations. Thus, according to Lorentz transformed coordinates, only one point along the transformed x-axis exists at the present. All other points existing either in the past or in the future. However, for a length between 2 points of a body to make any sense, these 2 points must be available, must exist at the same time, which the Lorentz transformations do not provide. Lorentz transformations destroy the very notion of length of a body. Not to mention that the notion of length, having no meaning after Lorentz transformations, makes it so that the widely claimed as real so-called length contraction cannot even be suggested, let alone experimentally verified. Furthermore, it is physically impossible to have tau sub 2 different from tau sub 1. If tau sub 1 is 0, it's physically impossible to have tau sub 2 minus 0.75, as Lorentz transformations calculate, because moving clocks are always synchronous in the stationary system with the underlying stationary clocks placed in the stationary system. This absolute truth is explicitly stated by Einstein in paragraph 2 of his founding 1905 paper. However, Einstein, in his desire to make a discovery at any rate, conveniently forgets promptly that absolute truth. Because acknowledging the absolute truth that spatially coinciding clocks are imminently synchronous, forgetting the absolute truth that clocks which coincide in space always show the same time on their faces, forgetting this absolute truth invalidates at once the theory he intends to put forth. Here is the exact quotation. We imagine further that at the two ends A and B of the rod, clocks are placed which synchronize with the clocks of the stationary system. That is to say, that their indications correspond at any instant of time to the, quote, time of the stationary system, unquote, at the places where they happen to be. These clocks are therefore quote, synchronous in the stationary system. These moving clocks and the underlying stationary clocks are synchronous in the stationary system. Now notice carefully, in addition to the cited quotation, that the moving clock is synchronous with the resting clock, not only in the stationary system, but also at rest with its own system. At rest with its own system, this clock is synchronous with the underlying clock in the stationary system with which it coincides spatially. Because one single clock does not possess two different constructions at the same time, one external and another internal. The hands on the face of a clock, moving or not, are where they are, both when these hands are seen from the stationary system and when these same hands are seen when looking at them while at rest with the clock. Further, consider also that when time in a given place of the stationary system at a given instant is 0, the time in all other places is also 0 at that instant. When the time in a given place is 0 at a given instant, the time in all other places at that instant is also 0. This can be illustrated by placing synchronized clocks in all points of the stationary system, sprinkling the stationary system with synchronized clocks. This is as an illustration to demonstrate, to show that time is the same everywhere in the stationary system. By the way, clocks can be made synchronous even by applying the one very simple synchronization criterion offered by Einstein, utilizing the discovery of Michelson and Morley that the velocity of light emitted by a source at rest with the system is homogeneously constant in all directions. Michelson and Morley's discovery must not be confused with Einstein's second postulate, the postulate for the constancy of the speed of light, which falsely requires that the constancy of light velocity must also be preserved when the source is moving with respect to the system. Postulating constancy of the speed of light when source of light is moving is incorrect. It is non-physical and is in conflict with Michelson's premise, which was negated by the experiment, firstly done by Michelson in 1881 and then in 1887, after one remark by Lorentz, was repeated in cooperation with Morley. So, in fact, the negative outcome from Michelson-Morley's experiment is the first experimental proof against the second postulate of Einstein's relativity. This is, however, a detail of no use for the discussion here, and therefore we need not elaborate on it. So again, when time in a given place of the stationary system at a given moment is 0, the time in all other places is also 0 at that moment. This, as already said, can be illustrated by placing synchronized clocks in all points of the stationary system. Thus, if one of these clocks shows on its face time 0 at a given moment, then all other stationary clocks necessarily also show 0 on their faces at that moment. Further, a set of clocks all moving at velocity v must also all of them show the same time at that moment. They must be synchronous. So if we have a set of two clocks clocks moving with respect to the stationary system. At the moment in question, these two moving clocks must show on their faces, on both faces of these moving clocks, time 0. These two moving clocks must be synchronous. Because these moving clocks inevitably coincide at the moment in question with stationary clocks which are synchronous. All stationary clocks at that moment show time 0 on their faces, as was repeatedly said. At every point of the stationary system, time has only one single value in all places at every moment. At every moment, that time value is one and the same everywhere, at all points. Thus, again, if at a given moment the time shown on the faces of the stationary clocks is 0, then no clock, even moving at velocity v, can show on its face time other than time 0. In other words, the calculation by the Lorentz transformations, that one clock moving at velocity v can show time 0 at a given moment, while another clock also moving with velocity v can show a different time minus 0.75, at the moment in question, is physically impossible. Because then, in the place where the moving clock happens to be at that moment in the stationary system, time must have two different values at the same time, namely value 0 and value minus 0.75, which is impossible. It's an absolute truth that in a given place, at a given moment, time can only have one single value, independent of how it's measured, independent of whether it is measured by a clock at rest in that place, or the time at that instant is measured by a moving clock which happened to be in that place at that instant. Therefore, it is impossible for two synchronous clocks, initially at rest with the stationary system, to lose synchronicity when both of these clocks are set in motion, set to move at constant velocity v. Simultaneity is absolute, and that is an inviolable absolute truth. The fact that both resting and moving clocks will necessarily show the same time on their faces at every given moment, which is determined by the absolute truth that spatially coinciding clocks are synchronous, also shows that the claimed phenomenon known as time dilation is impossible in principle. It's inherently impossible for time to run at different rates in different systems, which comprises time dilation. Therefore, any claim that time dilation has been confirmed experimentally must be dismissed outright. It is impossible to prove that 1 equals 2, which time dilation is in effect, let alone demonstrate it experimentally. Otherwise, Lorentz transformations are impeccable mathematically, but physically they make no sense whatsoever. Consider, for instance, someone claiming that velocity is not only distance over time, v equals s over t, but is also distance over the 7th power of time. V equals s over t to the 7th. There's nothing mathematically wrong in dividing a value by the 7th power of another value. However, such division makes no physical sense if these values are the physical quantities distance and time. So this velocity cannot be expressed. This is not physical to express velocity in this way. Because of the above, any theory relying on Lorentz transformations, such as the general relativity, string theories, cosmology, and so on, which has in its basis senselessness such as the above, any theory which has Lorentz transformations in its basis cannot be anything else but senseless, cannot be anything else but nonsense, and has no place in physics. Therefore, not only is length contraction a non-phenomenon, but even the very notion of length regarding the Lorentz transformed coordinates is destroyed, is non-existent. It has no roots in reality.